In the 19th century, religious reform came to Judaism. The first attempts to introduce reform into religious ritual were made by Israel Jacobson in the early 1800s. It began in two locations: the Kingdom of Westphalia, a French vassal state founded by Napoleon, and in Berlin. Neither one endured. The Westphalia consistory disappeared when the state was dissolved after the defeat of Napoleon. Moreover, conservative Prussian monarch Friedrich Wilhelm III closed the private houses of worship in Berlin. But elsewhere, the movement took root. The first Reformed temple was founded in Hamburg in 1818. The service was conducted according to the ritual of the Berlin reformers. Prayers were offered not just in Hebrew, but in German. Over time, the number of prayers in German increased, and prayers referring to the coming of the Messiah and the return to Zion were omitted. After all, shouldn't we feel fully at home in Europe rather than as dislocated Israelites waiting for the Messiah to bring us back home? There were also innovations in music, including the organ. Many Orthodox Jewish leaders were, however, aghast at what they perceived as watering down the very essence of the faith. The organ? What were these so-called temples anyway? Were they synagogues or churches? Much of traditional Judaism denied all legitimacy to the Reform movement. These are not synagogues, they insisted, and this is not the Jewish faith. Moses Sofer, rabbi of the most important Jewish community in Hungary, wrote this: "They have added to and deleted from the text of the prayers, substituting their own invention. They have eliminated the morning benedictions. They have discarded the benediction for the flourishing of the house of David, our Messiah, and for the rebuilding of Jerusalem, the holy city. Moreover, they have appointed a non-Jew to play a musical instrument in their presence on the holy Shabbat, which is forbidden, and significantly, the majority of their prayers are in German. These insignificant foxes have risen up to breach the walls and to destroy the fence that has been erected around the Torah. May we be saved from this evil and so merit the rebuilding of the temple." But in spite of internal disputes about the very nature of Judaism, the Jewish people continued to make headway in their quest to be recognized as authentic citizens of Europe. After Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815 and the liberation of Germany from French occupation, Jews actively participated in Germany's march toward unity and power as a nation-state. But that doesn't mean the anti-Semitism that had been prevalent had somehow been conquered. In Germany, the Jews had been so hungry for German culture that they didn't notice the defensiveness of the Germans themselves. The Jews of Germany were astounded when they encountered violent anti-Semitism among German university students. Still, the march toward Jewish emancipation could not be derailed, even though it had taken until the 19th century for full citizenship to be granted. In Western Europe, that dream was finally realized. In the 1800s, it happened. In France, Holland, and Belgium by 1831. In Denmark by 1849. Austria and Hungary by 1867. Italy by 1870. Germany and England by 1871, and in Switzerland by 1874. The revolutions of 1848 also helped Jews win back their rights in Germany, Austria, and Hungary. Sardinia granted equal rights to Jews in 1848, followed by Sicily, Naples, and Venice. The Papal States were forcibly taken by Italian armies in 1870. And then, at last, were compulsory sermons stopped and Jews allowed to leave the ghetto. The Jews were now free to vote, to run for office, to enter into the professions, and join the army. Of course, anti-Semitism remained the dark background noise of Jewish life in Europe. It was often given a veneer of pseudo-scientific jargon about the inherent characteristics of Semites and Aryans. In 1873, a financial crash occurred and was blamed on the Jews. With that as background, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck's court chaplain, Adolf Stocker, founded the Christian Social Workers Union to fight so-called Jewish socialism and Jewish domination of German life. He wrote, "I see modern Jewry as a great danger to German national life. By modern Jewry, I do not mean the religion of the Orthodox or the enlightenment of the Reformers. As for the Orthodox, with their ossification of the law, their Old Testament without temple, priests, sacrifices, or Messiah, they hold no attraction for the children of the 19th century and pose no dangers. In its deepest core, it is a dead religious form, a lower stage of revelation, a spirit that has outlived itself and, although still worthy of honor, has been invalidated by Christianity. It has no more truth for the present. Reform Judaism has even less religious significance. It is neither Judaism nor Christianity, but a shabby little survival of the Age of Enlightenment." A petition for restrictions against the Jews of Germany garnered 300,000 signatures. There were boycotts against Jews and anti-Semitic congresses. A French aristocrat, Arthur de Gobineau, produced a 4-volume work, Essay on the Inequality of the Human Race, published in 1853. An Englishman, Houston Stewart Chamberlain, produced an anti-Semitic racial work, The Foundations of the 19th Century, published in 1899. We must distinguish between Judaism and the Jews, and admit that Judaism, as an idea, is one of the most conservative ideas in the world. The idea of physical race unity and race purity, which is the very essence of Judaism, signifies the recognition of a fundamental physiological fact of life. Wherever we observe life, we see the importance of race. Judaism made this law of nature sacred, and this is the reason why it triumphantly prevailed at that critical moment in the history of the world. Consider with what mastery they use the law of blood to extend their power. The principal stem remains spotless. Not a drop of strange blood comes in. As it stands in the Torah, a bastard shall not enter into the congregation. In the meantime, however, thousands of side branches are cut off and employed to infect the Indo-Europeans with Jewish blood. If that were to go on for a few centuries, there would be in Europe only a single people of pure race, the Jews. All the rest would be a herd of pseudo-Hebraic mestizos, a people beyond all doubt degenerate, physically, mentally, and morally. Not surprisingly, Hitler actually admired his work. Some writers took up the anti-Jewish ideology of the church, even word for word. In the world of Islam, there was no move among Jews for emancipation. Many Islamic states granted Jews and Christians various civil rights between the middle of the 19th century and World War II, though almost all revoked those rights for the Jews after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. Looking to Eastern Europe, the Russians didn't quite know what to do with their Jews. They certainly didn't want them scattered throughout the land, so they restricted them to a region which by 1815 consisted of 25 provinces, from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, almost 500,000 square miles, where Jews comprised about 1/9 of the total population. They needed special permits to live in large cities. Such permits were granted mainly to Jews involved in the improvement of the Russian economy, to bankers, lumber dealers, factory workers, railroad builders. But from time to time, even these were expelled again and sent back to the Pale of Settlement. In the Christian feudal world of Russia, Jews were aliens to be exposed, despised, hated, feared. The expulsion of the Jews from the villages of the Pale of Settlement, halted by the invasion of Napoleon, resumed in 1822. Tsar Nicholas I, in 1827, instituted a system of forced conscription of young Jews into the Russian army. Jews presented by the community for the purpose of military service must be no younger than 12 and no older than 25 years of age. The Jews of each province must fulfill their quota of recruits independently of the Gentile population. The responsibility for fulfilling military obligations falls upon the Jewish communities themselves. They shall follow the dictates of the appropriate provincial authority. Jewish minors, those under 18, shall be sent to preparatory institutions for military training. Jews from the age of 18 and upwards shall be assigned to active military duty according to their physical condition, as ordered by the military command. Whoever discloses the names of those who hide a Jew escaping the draft shall receive a reward in the sum of 100 rubles from the treasury. The term of service, 25 years, a virtual death sentence. The law was applied equally to the Jewish communities of Lithuania and Ukraine. No Jewish parents wanted their children to serve in the army of this czar. They would falsify birth records, conceal their children, or maim them so they'd fail the army physical. Jews responsible for filling the quotas were forced to resort to the help of thugs who would snatch children to the accompaniment of the screams of their parents and neighbors. These children were not likely ever to be seen again. It was a time of horror. Nonetheless, the Jewish Enlightenment in the 19th century had another champion, Asher Ginsburg. also known as Ahad Ha'am, who lived from 1856 to 1927. Born in Skvira in today's Ukraine, Ginsburg was a friend and supporter of Leon Pinsker and a leader of the Chovavei Tzion, or Lovers of Zion movement. Chovavei Tzion began as independent study circles in the late 19th century and formed into a confederation called Chibat Zion, or the Love of Zion. Their practical aim was the settlement of Jews in Palestine, and they spearheaded the settlements of the first Aliyah, or immigration wave. Meanwhile, back in France, in 1886, a newspaper called La Libre Parole began printing exposés of a Jewish officer who had allegedly passed military secrets to Germany. This is the background of the notorious Dreyfus Affair, an international scandal on a political level that split France in two. Captain Alfred Dreyfus, who lived from 1859 to 1935, was the son of a well-to-do assimilated family of Alsatian ancestry. He was almost a bit player in the scenario, involving charges and countercharges, perjury, and forged evidence. This was the trial of the 19th century. It was virtually impossible for a Frenchman to be progressive without being for Dreyfus. It was equally impossible to be pro-army and pro-church without being against him. In 1894, Dreyfus was tried and convicted of having sent to a German military attaché in Paris a promise to deliver to Germany a French artillery manual. He was sent to a penal colony at Devil's Island off the coast of French Guiana. He was quoted as saying, "I walk around feeling a sort of existential guilt all the time, and honestly, for me, this place is a way of feeling less guilty about the universe." In his absence, the Dreyfusards sought to expose numerous irregularities of his trial. The anti-Dreyfusards just as fervently sought to cover them up with propaganda that was nationalistic and anti-Semitic. Observing and reporting on all of this was a correspondent of Vienna's Neue Freie Presse, the New Free Press, named Theodor Herzl. In 1891, Herzl was appointed to Paris. At first, he believed that Dreyfus was guilty, but within a few weeks, as the arrest of Dreyfus brought cries of "Down with the Jews" from Paris street mobs, Herzl became convinced not only that Dreyfus was innocent, but also that the wave of anti-Jewish feeling unleashed by this one man's disgrace revealed, perhaps for the first time, the true precariousness of the Jews' position in the diaspora. The Dreyfus case contained more than a miscarriage of justice. It contained the wish of the vast majority in France to damn one Jew, and through him, all Jews. The crowd yelled, "Death to the Jews!" when they ripped the stripes from Dreyfus's uniform. And from then on, "Down with the Jews!" became a battle cry. Where? In France? In Republican, modern, civilized France, 100 years after the Declaration of the Rights of Man? In 1895, Herzl wrote his Zionist manifesto, The Jewish State, published in 1896. He wrote, My pamphlet, The Jewish State, will open a general discussion on the Jewish question. Shall we choose the Argentine Republic or Palestine? We will take what is given us and what is selected by Jewish public opinion. Argentina is one of the most fertile countries in the world. Palestine is our ever-memorable historic home. The force we need is created in us by anti-Semitism. What form of constitution shall we have? I am inclined to an aristocratic republic, although I am an ardent monarchist in my own country. What language shall we speak? Every man can preserve the language in which his thoughts are at home. This is my message, fellow Jews. Neither fable nor fraud. We shall live at last as free men on our own soil and die peacefully in our own home. Also in 1896, independent investigators and French intelligence officials determined that the real traitor wasn't Dreyfus at all, but an infantry officer of Hungarian background, Major Marie-Charles Ferdinand Welsin Esterhazy. The years 1897 and 1898 brought the first two Zionist congresses, both in Basel, and on January 13, 1898, the publication by French novelist and journalist Émile Zola of J'accuse, I accuse, his open letter to the President of France denouncing the Dreyfus cover-up and exposing the perpetrators. Dreyfus was brought back from Devil's Island for a new trial in 1899, but was again convicted, this time not on the evidence, but on the belief that exoneration would bring humiliation to the French army. But when new elections brought a more liberal government into power, the conviction was overturned. The prestige of the military sharply declined, and the forces of reason triumphed, but all too briefly. What shall we make of all this? Were the Jews right to plant themselves firmly on European soil, proud of achieving full citizenship at last? Or should they have been more attentive to the continuing background noise of anti-Semitism? Watson once observed, at the end of a case, "It's so obvious once you explain it." But the clues were hardly obvious. In fact, being able to look at apparently random collections of clues and figure out how they fit together is incredibly difficult. However, because after the fact it seems so clear, we are vulnerable to the hindsight trap. We assume that because hindsight is 20/20, foresight must have been 20/20 as well. At the time, however, nothing was elementary.